Mr. Speaker, will you please call the House to order?
The bill is passed.
We'd like to get a budget that represents the interests of the people who are standing here with me now.
To be part of the struggle to achieve a better society for all.
I'm very compassionate to what's happening upstate. And I'm very compassionate to what's happening downstate.
Hello and welcome to Assembly Update. I'm Liz Koenig. Today we're going to be talking about the State Assembly's budget resolution with our guest, Assemblyman Walter Mosley, who represents the 57th Assembly District in Brooklyn. Thanks for coming in today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. And I don't think have we spoken to you since you've been back from your trip? I think we did from Israel, which was it was great to have you on the phone and talk about everything that was going on over there. And glad you made it back safe and sound. And we're going to talk a little bit about another event that you had to go to out of town too in a little while. But first I want to talk about this budget resolution because it's part of the budget process. The governor presents his budget, the Assembly passes their budget, the other House passes their budget, and then we come together and negotiate a final product. So why don't we first talk about what's included in the Assembly's budget resolution in the area of education?
Well, this is only our recommendation to his executive proposal, and obviously the Senate comes out with their one house, and it's already out in public for people to view. But as it comes to education, we restored, for us, $1.2 billion in foundation aid, CFE money, which I think takes us up to like $18.4 billion for education in general. Higher ed, we have some provisions to kind of supplement the Excelsior program. I think the MLK Scholarship Foundation, which kind of fills in the gap where Excelsior does not help, particularly poorer students who need additional aid for transportation, books, room and board. So we're comfortable in regards to education. Obviously, we've made some significant contributions to NYCHA, $200 million for capital funding, capital improvement funding, aid towards transportation. Congestion pricing is not in the budget. However, the parameters and $200 million we have recommended to implement the actual, I guess, the apparatus of the zone in terms of how we'll be collecting tolls, the technology, the staffing that's going to be used to kind of monitor and man that system. So we're pleased with this $170.2 billion budget proposal. But at the same time, we understand that we have two other people in front of us we have to negotiate with who have different philosophical beliefs. But we believe that we'll get to an on-time budget this year as well.
Now, is the Assembly putting more money into education over the governor's budget?
Yes,
okay.
Considerably, over $300 million more. We believe that that's where the philosophical differences are. When we compared our budget proposal compared to the executive proposal and the Senate proposal, we believe that investing on the front end in terms of educating our children, our future workforce, will pay off in the long run and allow for us not to pay a bigger debt on the back end. Should we fail these future New Yorkers who are going to be our future taxpayers and future wage earners, and will lead us into a 21st century market where automation, AI will be the dominant market industry that will drive our economies, not only in New York State, but throughout the country.
Now, we've seen some success in recent years in the area of criminal justice reform. Of course, there's always more work to be done. Is there anything included in the Assembly proposal? Well,
obviously, bail reform is extremely important. Speedy trial reform is also involved, as well as grand jury reform, which is the bill I'm carrying. But bail reform clearly is critical for us, particularly the downstate area. And I think we talked about this before in terms of closing. Sure. As the city proposes to close down Rikers Island, the largest correctional facility in jail, and not only in our city but our state, we have to understand that we have to bring down population. And the only way we bring down population is if we deal with, again, pretrial provisions that unfortunately have led to feeding Rikers Island with people who have languished in those jails for not only months but years, just awaiting a trial. These are people who have been convicted of a crime and been adjudicated and are awaiting sentencing. These are people who are still presumed to be innocent and have not been found guilty in the court of law. So what we want to do is making sure that we properly categorize those individuals who are arrested for misdemeanors, nonviolent felonies, and have the least restrictive provisions put on them when we're talking about making sure that they find themselves back in court to face adjudication and to have their time to have their say in court. But not to punish them on top of the charge that they've been given, to punish them doubly by putting them in a holding facility and allowing them to languish. I think it's inhumane. I think it's something that is somewhat barbaric, and something that we believe that as New Yorkers we can do better if we're going to make New York the Empire State again. We have to do things that are a little bit different than we've done in the past.
Now, you did speak a little bit about transportation. I wanted to get a little more detail because we've seen some problems with the subway system, which is aging and is in great need of repair. Right. Do you believe that there is adequate funding in the governor's proposal to cover transportation, mainly in New York City?
Well, right now we believe that what we want to do right now is get the apparatus in place for congestion pricing. Because congestion price is going to be the fuel that's going to help us restore our system, restore trust in our system, restore its credibility. But at the same time, we have to understand that we don't want to rush this. We only have one time to get it right. If we get it wrong, there are consequences to that. It impacts our economy, impacts our ability to generate revenue, and subsequently, it impacts our entire state. Given New York City is really the economic engine of our state. So we're going to talk about congestion pricing in a contextual format, but at the same time, after the budget's passed, then we'll actually be able to talk about it and be in concentrated terms as to what exactly we want out of this in terms of how we're going to generate revenue, how we're going to tax the for-hire vehicles, how we're going to tax commercial trucks, how we're going to deal with how the money is spent. Are we going to put it in a lockbox for the MTA to spend? Once you get it in the lockbox, how does the MTA decide to spend it? We have to make sure that we put those type of parameters in place so it's not spent illegitimately or is mismanaged in any sort of way, which unfortunately the MTA has been accused of in the past.
Now, some of your upstate colleagues might say, well, what about us? What about the roads and bridges upstate? And I know this is also a concern of yours. Right. Is there money included in that area too?
There's money set aside for upstate transportation systems, as well as adequate funding for their highways, chip money. So we don't exclude them from the conversation when it comes to raising revenue, improving their transportation systems, because we're only as strong as our weakest link. And if we understand that there's issues with other subway systems and transportation systems in other major cities, as well as the non-major cities, we know we have to generate revenue. Sometimes if we need to generate revenue in the city, to kind of allocate some of that revenue elsewhere.
Now let's move on and talk about housing, NYCHA funding.
Yeah, so we put $200 million aside for capital improvements to NYCHA, which I think is critical, and this is really earmarked towards boiler replacements, remediation of mold, which are the two huge issues related to NYCHA. But this is only the beginning. $200 million is just a mere drop in the bucket when you're talking about an agency that's in the red when it comes to their budget. But at the same time, the city has a $4.4 billion surplus. So we expect the city to complement what we're doing in the state because we're working from a $4 billion deficit as a state. So, but I think the governor understands how important this is. We have 400,000 people that depend on NYCHA as their residents, and clearly, there's some people who are living in substandard conditions that we would only equate with, developing nations.
Now, I want to move on and talk about election law. There are some provisions provided in this budget resolution, and one calls for early voting. What can you tell us about that? So
this is I forgot who actually has the bill. I think it's Chuck Levine, but our election committee chair. But this is a bill that right now it's at 7 days. We give early voting for people. That gives us a full weekend before Election Day. We're not certain if we want to extend that to 11 or 12 days, so we'll have 2 successive weekends. Obviously, the point is to maximize voter participation, which is at an all-time low, not only in New York State, but throughout the country. We want more voter participation, so people feel engaged, people feel a part of this whole process we call governing. But at the same time, we also understand that we have to kind of delineate between what is being allocated in terms of resources and provisions. Is that just for the implementation of the program and the subsequent execution of it, or do we have to use that money just for setting up the parameters and then relying upon the local governments to, supplement it, or relying upon a city like New York who's willing to, do their fair share in terms of providing the finances to implement it on a larger scale, comparatively speaking to the upstate counties where you might just need one voting booth or one voting location where everybody can come and vote early. So those are the things that we have to kind of work out. But I think in the long run we'll get to a point where we come to a happy medium.
Well, what about preventing cyber attacks in our election system?
And that's some of the provisions that some of the appropriations that we've allocated in our One House deals exactly with that. Given everything that's taking place on a national scale, we're going to try to do everything possible in absence of what others aren't doing elsewhere. We're going to take on the responsibility of protecting at least our voting system so that no one can interfere with our democratic process in New York State.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about, you just returned from Washington. Can you tell us why you were there?
Well, I was giving a presentation. I was the host to former Nobel Peace Prize winning diplomat and Ralph Bunche, his grandchildren, his granddaughter, and his 2 great-grandsons at AIPAC, was the American-Israeli Public Affairs Commission. And I'm the reigning recipient of that award. It's an award that has a lot of prestige to it. I had to speak before 12,000 people, and it was an honor to do so. And it was an honor to serve as host to these individuals, and as well as the 2 subsequent individuals who been awarded this prestigious honor. And I was there, representing my district, representing Brooklyn, but also representing a portion of my constituents who are Jewish American. And so I always go to this conference to learn more, to learn what's going on the global scale, what's happening in the Middle East, and to apply it to what I learn in real life and in real time when I go overseas.
Now, a couple weeks out from the budget, just very quickly, on-time budget this year?
Well, I hope so. I mean, we're coming close to early celebrations of our religious holidays, Passover and Easter. So hopefully that will serve as a motivation to have an on-time budget. You don't want to interfere with something that's higher than you.
And of course, we want to have the right budget as well, though.
Correct.
So, all right. Thank you very much for the update. We appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Lisa.
We've been speaking with Assemblyman Walter Mosley, who represents the 57th Assembly District in Brooklyn. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.